if the technologies work correctly, you should be able to see the first slide, which is just a title slide, not particularly exciting. And thank you to Sue for that introduction, and thank you very much for everybody on the call. I know we've got an international audience with us as well, so very interested to have your questions as we go through. This is very much a discussion format. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through lots and lots of slides. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by some extremely qualified people who can talk an awful lot about their experience with governance and how it plays into the risk experience. So I would encourage you to ask any questions and to ask for hints and tips as we go through the session. So just a little bit about the IRSM organisation, for those of you who are not familiar with it, and I know that we have some people that are not members joining us today. It's an independent organisation, and it covers, as the chart says there, 95 different countries, and that includes the UK, the Middle East, Africa, and so on and so forth. It's a community united around a common desire to really invigorate risk management and to help companies make better decisions about what they do. As such, it's a learning organisation, and it has a really great network of experience within it, and I would encourage everybody to look at the website to look and understand some of the fantastic resources that are there. And as Sue's already mentioned as well, the YouTube channel has got a number of really great sources of information, not just around health and safety risk, but around risk in all sorts of different areas as well. Today, though, we're talking very specifically around governance and how governance helps organisations run more effectively. And I'm really delighted to be joined by two colleagues that I've worked with now for a number of years. I'm going to let them do a little bit of introductions to you and on who they are, what they do, and so on and so forth. So, Helena, do you want to introduce yourself first of all and just explain what part of England MenCap do and how governance is so really important to you at the charity?
That's great. Thank you, Helen. I'm delighted to actually have the opportunity to talk to everybody about our approach to governance and risk, but also share some information as we move forward about what I've learned from other organisations. Heart of England MenCap, just for those people that don't know, we're a charitable organisation, but we're a business as well. We deliver care and support to adults with a learning disability, and our main aim is to enable them to live their best life. So as a not-for-profit, clearly we still aim to ensure we make a surplus, and that's all reinvested back into the business. Just in terms of size, turnover £5.5 million, and we employ 200 people. And our main volunteers are our board of trustees and directors. As chief exec, I'm responsible for the charity, its financial performance, and I report to the board of trustees and directly to the chair. They effectively delegate their powers to me to enable me to run the organisation, but they have very distinct responsibilities also that they have to comply with. Interestingly, all of the trustees are volunteers. None of them are remunerated. And I think that's always a very interesting concept when you have a legal accountability and responsibility. So that's who we are.
I know that's a really brilliant introduction, and we're going to come back to the makeup of your board of trustees because I actually know some of them personally and what makes your board tick and how are they valuable to you. So we're going to definitely cover that a little bit later. Steve, some of the delegates on the call here may well be familiar with you, but please introduce yourself and again, what's your specific focus on governance as well?
I like the concept of being familiar with me, but anyway. Keep this clean. I'm Steve Fowler. I'm an International Governance, Risk and Strategy Advisor, which is a job title I made up for myself, having done lots of things in my life. I'm passionate about not using three-letter acronyms. You know, if there's a proper word for something, let's use the words rather than use jargon to confuse people. So, where does my contact with governance come in? Well, for 12 years, I was Chief Executive Officer and also an Executive Director of another risk management institute. So as Executive Director, obviously, I was the one paid person on that board. And reflecting Helena's experience, all the other directors on that board, the non-executive directors, they were unremunerated as well. after my time with that organisation, I became a non-executive director and a trustee of another occupational safety and health organisation, where I was chair of the remuneration committee. And there again, reflecting Helen's experience, no one on that board was remunerated, apart from the executive director. These days, I'm a non-executive director and governor of a university in London. Again, not paid. How does he pay the food bills, you ask? Unpaid, non-executive director, a charity. Universities are quite an interesting branch of charities. I've been the chair of the Risk and Audit Committee of the board at the university, and I'm currently chair of the Workforce Governance Committee at the university as well. So that's me. I've been involved working with the Financial Reporting Council in the past over the development of the UK Corporate Governance Code as well. So I can add some insight to that.
Excellent, Steve. And just to introduce myself as well, and again, some of you may be familiar with my background. I'm Managing Director at Risk Evolves, and we are a governance, risk and compliance organisation. We're a management consultancy that helps companies understand how they can improve their governance, risk and compliance posture. And we do that through a number of different ways, including risk audits. We help companies undertake ISO certifications, whether that be in information security, quality management, environmental management, and so on. But all those standards at their heart have a really strong governance structure. And then, as Steve said, that's my paid job, but I also, similar to Steve, I am also a non-exec. I'm a trustee of a charity here in the UK as well, a charitable theatre group actually. And prior to that, I was a governor as well at a school. And I think that experience, a combination of the charitable, the not-for-profit, the business, really gives anybody that's on this call a really good opportunity to kind of tap into some of that experience. And I think one of my recommendations for anybody who's more interested in governance is actually go out and volunteer to be a trustee or a non-exec on a board, because you learn so much and you can bring your business experience as well to help those organisations. But more on the makeup of boards as we go through this session, because the makeup of boards is so important and so integral to good governance. So moving on, right, what is good governance? And I mean, good governance means all sorts of different things to all sorts of different people, but guess what? There is an ISO standard in this space, and there was a massive revision to that ISO standard just last year. For the geeks among us, and that's me really, I enjoy reading standards. Look at ISO 37000. It's a family of standards. ISO 37000 itself looks at the good governance principles, and I'll share with you a diagram that helps bring that into a little bit more meaningful structure. But that within the 37000 structure, within the 37001 family rather, you've got standards like anti-bribery, for example, which clearly is a core component of how governance should focus, should manage within an organisation. Now, that's standard, and we always go back to ISO standards because they give us a really good framework of what experts say good governance is. But good governance is a number of different things, but it's there to fulfil the purpose of the organisation by providing foundations in ethical, effective and responsible behaviours. And if I talk to Helena, I know that's so important to you, isn't it, in terms of how the organisation runs and the fact that you do it in a way that is effective and you are responsible as well. So really key.
I think, I think we've had to really invest some time in this. So it's interesting because what I would say is that people do give their time freely to be a trustee of an organisation like ours. But over, I would say, the last 5 to 6 years, I think the environment, whether it's a political environment, the economic environment, have all impacted upon the not-for-profit sector. And the requirement for trustees, it's not just about doing something good. So you might have a passion to be part of something, but there is such a legal responsibility. So I've actually spent such a lot of time building the knowledge of my trustees around this. And interestingly, some trustees stepped down from the role because they felt it was too onerous. They came to contribute to society in a very positive way, but actually when they looked at the legal responsibilities, and it's my job to help them see that as well. And the other learning was about the chair. The role of the chair is fundamental. And when we say governance, there's a word I always put next to it, and that's leadership. They are aligned with each other, and you can't separate them.
You can't, absolutely. And leadership is about making sure that the outcomes of good governance are actually affected, doesn't it? And the outcomes of good governance should be effective performance. So the charity, the not-for-profit, the business should be performing. And that's not just financially, but that's in all other ways, whether it be sustainably, whether it's being environmentally conscious, it's got to have effective performance. The standard also talks about responsible stewardship as well, and I had to delve into that. What do they mean by stewardship? But stewardship is very much around, and it links very tightly as well to ethical behaviour, about making sure that we're doing it in a way that's compliant, that we're not bullying people, that we are conforming to aspects of the law, that we are meeting stakeholder and shareholder requirements and engagements. And Steve, from your experience, what's your core comments and thoughts on those outcomes of good governance?
Well, if I could just pick on the second one, Helen, responsible stewardship. Of course, this has gained a whole new complexion these days because the whole world is talking about sustainability. Now, I remember growing up in the last century, in the 20th century, where organizations would talk about their most important stakeholders. These are businesses talking about their most important stakeholders being their shareholders. I don't think anyone necessarily believes that anymore. It's a whole new picture out there. If you sit back and think about who your stakeholders are as an organization, okay, the owners of the organization, if it's a listed organization, maybe shareholders, but other owners of an organization, they're important. But the people who come to work for you are also arguably more important. If the employees of your organization all decide that they're going to leave, you're left with no organization in most cases. And of course, in today's sustainable world, we need to look broader than that. We need to look at third parties who are impacted by the activities of our organization. And there's many an organization that's got itself in hot water for doing things that might, for instance, upset their local community, upset their customers or their suppliers. So it's a broader picture than it used to be. The world's got more complex.
And actually, Steve, that's a really good point, and it links to one of the webinars that we did last month with NQA, the certification body that looks at ISO standards, and with the insurance representative Ian McKinney from Gallagher's Insurance. That was something they were very keen about as well, was around understanding who your stakeholders are. They are not, you're absolutely right, it's not just shareholders, it's everybody from your employees, the families of your employees, it's the local community, it's the bank, it's the compliance people, it's the regulators. It's a very, very broad group of people now that we should be considering when we're talking about governance. And clearly customers is among that, but again, it's not the only group.
I'll tell you what I always think of on this. If you take the biggest investment company in the world, BlackRock, run by a chap called Larry Fink, I can't quite remember the amount, but I think they've got something like $3 trillion in terms of funds under management. Every company that Larry invests in, he writes to every year, writes to the chairman or the CEO, and basically he asks for one thing. He asks for a commitment to effective governance and effective risk management. And he asks for evidence that that organization is meeting the needs of all of its stakeholders. Not interested directly in financial performance. You hit the, if you ensure you're meeting the needs of your key stakeholders, all your stakeholders, then financial performance will flow from that. But if you just focus on financial performance, as Larry's realized, the organization could be out of business tomorrow.
Absolutely.
I was going to say that's a really good point, Steve, because I think that finance is a thing that we can measure black and white. And what we've found is we actually put a lot of time into measuring that, but we've moved to much more of a what we call a balanced scorecard approach now, that is measuring and monitoring those softer things that make a huge difference to our performance and ultimately to the lives of the people we support. Because we don't, we're not for profit, but we've still got to make a difference in people's lives and have an impact. And actually, in doing that, what I've moved governance and risk from this once a year review of 42 risks that the board sit around and go, oh, really? Do we have to review this? They are now embedded in our strategy. It's part of our strategy and achieving our objectives. And it sits as one of the foundation stones of how we operate. So we've moved it away from that thing that we just have to do every year, and it's embedded in the way that we manage all of our communications and our meetings. And that's been one of the things that's made the biggest difference.
I love that, Helena, because it stops governance and risk from being boring and it becomes real.
Yeah.
So, and I think all that you just said actually plays to this fantastic diagram, which is in the ISO 37000 standard, which tries to encapsulate everything you've just said in one picture. And it talks about risk governance, it talks about data and decision making, it talks about leadership, it talks about stakeholder engagement. And for me, this is kind of like governance on a page, if you can have such a thing. And it talks very much around understanding the values you've got within the business. What's your purpose for running the organisation? How are you going to be socially responsible? How are you going to govern the risk? What data do you have, and how is that data allowing you to make decisions? So it's not just about meetings, is it? It's not just about people in a boardroom. It's very much a very holistic approach to how an organisation should run.
We do have a question.
Okay, fantastic. Go for it, Sue.
Does the panel agree that before you can have governance or leadership or compliance, we must have ethics?
I would certainly agree. Steve, what's your thought on that?
It's a simple answer, yes. I mean, one can have the argument as to whether ethics is actually part of good leadership and therefore part of good governance. Could be a circular argument, but certainly governance and ethics are directly related in every way.
And that's exactly what this diagram is showing as well. Around here, we've got ethical behaviour, effective performance and responsible stewardship being the three outcomes from effective governance. And clearly, to have ethical behaviour, you have to have ethics in the first place. What is it? What's your parameters? What's your message for your leadership message? And we're going to come on to that a little bit more. But Helena, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's the ethical behaviour is at the heart of everything we do. And I think it's a really good question, that, because I don't think those other things could exist in isolation. It's how everybody behaves in the organisation and their approach. And that's fundamental to the decision making. As tough as it is and making tough decisions, we've got to do that ethically as well. So I think that's a really important question, and something it would have a huge position in our organisation about how our ethics are and our purpose.
And I'd expand that as well to integrity being part of that as well. For me, ethical behaviour and having integrity is so important to good governance. Steve, what are you showing there? We've got a picture.
I've just replaced myself with the UK Corporate Governance Code. Now, this is just the UK Corporate Governance Code, but most corporate governance codes, certainly around the non-North American world, follow similar principles. And I'm just looking at the first principle listed in the code. It doesn't use the word ethics, but it does talk about successful organizations being led by effective boards, generating value for shareholders and contributing to wider society. So the implication in the second part of that, contributing to wider society, is that the organization has to de facto be an ethical organization. The second principle then goes on to talk about values as well as strategy. And in my world, values and ethics are directly related. So bear in mind, this is the UK Corporate Governance Code from the Financial Reporting Council. So this is about large capitalist organisations, some of which sometimes are seen as not that ethical, but it's here in black and white. You know, ethics matter, even at that level.
And we know, Steve, don't we, with changes in legislation within the UK around, again, the environmental, the social and the governance, the ESG, the sustainability goals, we know there is increasing focus from certainly financial organisations looking to invest, that the companies in which they intend to invest have got those really good credentials from ethical, environmental, societal purposes. This is not just about what's the bottom line look like. This is not just about the balance sheet. This is very much now around the whole ethical behaviour of the organisation and what they're giving back to society as well. So we just touched on leadership. Steve, you introduced me to this tone from the top, music in the middle, beat of the feet.
Well,
Explain.
I actually stole this. I stole this from.
Let's talk about ethical behaviour, Steve, and you're talking about stealing.
He did let me steal it. I stole this from Professor Mervyn King, not to be confused with Lord Mervyn King, who was the Governor of the Bank of England. Professor Mervyn King was the Lord Chief Justice for South Africa. And he's actually the originator of what's called the King 3, named after him, governance code, which is the South African governance code, which tends to be seen as probably the world's leading corporate governance code. South Africa sort of leads the world in this area. And he said, look, a lot of people talk about tone at the top in an organization as if that's the only thing that matters. But if you think about organizations that maybe we've all worked in, then yeah, the tone at the top matters, but there are those very influential people in the middle of the organization, the ones who will tap you on the shoulder and say, yeah, the boss might say that, but what he or she really means is this. So the tune in the middle also matters. That's really important, as well as the tone at the top. But what matters most of all, and bearing in mind this has come from South Africa, the beat of the feet on the ground is what really matters. So leadership matters, but how that leadership ripples all the way through middle management, who are so influential, through to shop floor and shop floor management, what people do. So it's more nuanced than maybe people pretend it to be. When we three of us agreed that we wouldn't talk about one particular government today, but if one talks about governments, it's so easy to say, actually, what really matters is what the person at the top says. Well, yeah, but it also matters what's coming out of the middle of the organization as well, because they can influence the top as well as the bottom.
Right, I couldn't agree more. I'm sure we've all got examples. Helena, go for it.
Yeah, I think, I'd not seen this before, and I do love the way it describes. It's throughout the organisation, and I often think of myself as a conductor, and I don't have to play all the instruments myself, but I do have to help the middle of the organisation come together effectively. And everybody knows their parts and they know which part of the tune they're playing, and that's what makes great music. But interestingly, when we talked about the tone from the top, we were trying to find something that would fit also with our values. And we came across something which are the 7 principles of public life. They're UK related, but some really simple words. This is not scientific, by the way. That's about selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. And we've used those principles for our board as part of their performance review. It's hard to do performance review when you're a volunteer. They've offered their time and knowledge and skill set, but we had to put a structure in that actually broke down this a little bit more that we could utilize and measure. And you're conducting the orchestra very well. So, but those principles, when the board looked at them, they had the feeling, and it was a feeling, that those were behaviours that they would also watch from each other and give feedback. So
Someone
it
gave me
worked
this,
well.
Helena, to illustrate
Really,
that
yeah.
point,
So yeah,
presenting
I
me
like
with the
that.
pattern. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Needless to
So
say, I can't play the violin, but you know, I can be a conductor.
you can be a conductor. We're not
Yeah.
talking about everybody being able to do everything, are we? We're
No,
talking
no.
about a blend. And that, I think, kind of brings us on to the next point, because when we were rehearsing for this yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about probably a hot topic now in governance, which is around diversity at the board. Diversity at the board level is absolutely crucial, isn't it? So who's going to start on this? Because go on then, Helen. You've got a fantastic board that I've worked with, and I think they epitomise a really good diverse board, because they come from so many different backgrounds, don't they? They've got lots of different experience that they bring to you. So just explain a little bit more about, and how you found them as well. How do you find people to be on your board?
Yeah, well,
$1 million question.
I've been the chief exec here for 9 years now, and I still feel like I'm new. I still say I'm new to this job. When I started in this role, it had a board of 16 individuals who volunteered and did amazing things. They founded the organisation at a time when there was genuinely nothing else on offer for people with learning disabilities. Adults were hidden in other places. So, you know, I think they were instrumental in changing people's lives. But what happened was the world changed, you know, regulations changed, finance changed, funding, state funding changed, but the board didn't change. They kept still. And of course, we know when you stand still, you don't stay still, you go backwards. And so I had to, as part of my remit, look to actively changing the board. But I worked out I had to do things differently. Most of the time, the way that we attracted trustees was through word of mouth. And needless to say, we attracted exactly the same person every time. White, middle class, middle England male. That's what we attracted.
The phrase is male, pale and stale in the UK, I'm afraid, isn't it? So
yeah.
do.
And you know, so good contacts they were, and I'm not saying those individuals couldn't be on the board, they could. However, I felt diversity meant that we had to be inclusive. And now on the board, we've recruited somebody with autism, because we support people with autism and we have to think about how we communicate and engage. We've got people from different socio-economic groups, and we've actively gone out to target those people and give them support. You know, people who might not be able to afford a laptop, we think everybody can afford that. That's not the case. And enabling trustees to claim expenses in some cases. And then a young person, I actively went out to 3 universities and was seeking a young person to be able to start to help us think about it. So our board now is incredibly diverse. And actually, I have more difficulty attracting men than I do women now. Isn't that interesting? But
interesting.
That has also come from doing a full skills review. I wanted to know what I was looking for. And unless you do a skills review of your directors, you don't know what you're looking for. You don't know what your gaps are, and you don't know what you need to fill. And that's what my chair and I worked on reviewing. And that's put us in a really good position now.
So when you did that skills review, are you able to share the type of things that you included as part of that review? Presumably it wasn't just a review of their CV, presumably you looked at other factors as well.
We looked at our risks. We looked at what our risks were in the organisation, and that a lot of that were around the political environment and the funding for state-funded health and care. So we knew that we had some experts that were marketing and finance. We were always strong on finance. We could get lots of finance people, but understanding housing and the impact of housing on people's lives, understanding the politics, the local government politics was really important. We didn't have anybody with that knowledge. And the link with healthcare. In the UK, there's a lot of talk about integrated health and social care, but we had no one with any healthcare skills. Now we have a consultant GP who is very active in promoting integration of health and social care. That's really helped us network with key organisations and partners. So the skill sets were about identifying what we were missing and using that to help shape our recruitment, even all the way to where we advertised, not just on a job board, but actually targeted recruitment. And the next one I'm focusing on is parent carers, or somebody with lived experience, and we're very careful where we target the recruitment activity.
Okay, fantastic. Steve, what about you? Because I know you certainly at the university you've been doing some work in this space as well, haven't you?
Yeah. Much of my experience reflects yours, Helena, actually. The organisations I've worked in, we've been through much the same sort of process in terms of looking at who our key stakeholders are, and also looking at the purpose of the organisation and where we plan to get to, and then doing a complete skills and experience audit for those of us who sit on the board currently. So at the University of West London, we're very focused on promoting opportunities for working class older students who maybe missed the education system earlier in their lives. And when we say older students, I don't mean really old people like me. I mean those who've got to their mid-20s or maybe early 30s and thought, right, what I chose to do after school, actually that's not working out for me. I wish I'd done a degree. So we're there to pick those people up. The name of the university is a bit of a misnomer, University of West London, but we're also in Reading and in Oxford as well. So we are the University of the West from London. So what we've tried to do is to ensure that the board reflects the types of students that we're trying to attract. And of course, students aren't everything. They are our most important stakeholders. They're our customer base. So naturally, we've had a student on our board for a long, long time. The government's now come out and said to universities, actually, universities, you should be thinking about having students on your board. Well, we've had one for ages. Most other universities don't do that. So what we've decided to do, now that the government said have one, we're going for two on the board. So, broad range of students, why not have more than one student on the board? We also have workforce members, employees on the board. It's important to us. The university employs 2,500 people, so we feel it's really important that we shouldn't just have one person, one senior leader. We should have a couple of people at different levels, reflecting their stake in the organisation. When we look at skills and experience, we don't just look at the usual sort of listed criteria. There is a tendency to do this on a tick box basis and look at gender, colour, sexual orientation, religion, those things that are listed as areas of diversity in law. So we try and look beyond those factors to other things like, and you mentioned it, Helena, socioeconomic background and experience. We don't want to end up with a board of people, all of whom are different colours, different genders, and so on and so forth, but all of whom have the same experience. And it's so easy to do that if you follow an approach to diversity that doesn't look at people's backgrounds and people's thinking process. And final bullet point on your slide there, Helen, independence. Well, I'm thinking of that from 2 points of view. One is to ensure that the board operates as one, but with each director, governor, trustee on the board being an independent voice, but also independence in the approach to appointing a diverse board in the first place. Bring in outside help, because you don't know what you don't know. I certainly don't know what I don't know.
Absolutely. So I've included 2 quotes there that came from McKinsey. And Sue, I don't know whether we're sharing the slide set afterwards, but I've also included in the notes as well 2 other sources of information that came from the World Economic Forum and Harvard Business Review. What you've got, let's say we have a diverse board now. What's your thoughts and comments on making sure that we've got a board that listens as well to all the members? You know, we've all been in those meetings where you've got somebody who's very dominant in a meeting and is very happy to share their views, not to consider anybody else's views for a 2-hour meeting, and everybody kind of walks away punch drunk thinking, what the hell happened there? How do you manage it so that, you know, everybody has an equal voice around the table, which allows those contrasting views, insights, conversations about diversity, conversations about what needs to happen with an organisation? How do you manage that when you've got that really strong character in the room?
I think, you know, that comes down to the role of the chair, and the role that the chair plays, again, is that conductor of that orchestra in that room at that meeting. I think a couple of things, being really clear about the agenda that you have for that meeting. I've learned that, you know, making sure that we have the right things on the agenda and allowing time for that discussion is critical. Yes, we've got things to review, and yes, we've got things, the finance to go through, and we do that, but we've been much more creative at enabling our board to have all the information before the meeting, but the meetings are much more focused on enabling and empowering each member of the board to have a say, even if that say is, well, I don't really understand this, so I want to be able to check this out. That's where we've had most of our most beneficial discussions. But I tell you what's made a difference is the chair enabling and empowering and allowing people to speak. So the skills in that role, I think, are just quite significant and are often overlooked. So that for me is
a good facilitator, a good somebody that's happy to collaborate rather than to compete for airtime in the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
And certainly that's my experience as well of effective boards, where you've got a strong chair who can keep the tone of the meeting going forward, but is willing to bring people in. If they're sat quiet on the periphery of the meeting, then bring them in and have discussions around. And I completely agree as well that effective meetings for me is where you receive the board pack a good 24 hours before the meeting. You know, you don't want to have to digest big heavy documents at short notice, but then you bring the exceptions to the meeting rather than going page by page by page through the meeting minutes and so on. Steve, what's your experience in this space?
As I've said before on everything else we've said, I agree with Helena. The role of the chair is absolutely everything. You've got a good chair and you end up with a good board. With a poor chair, in particular in a charity, with a chair who thinks that he or she is there to do the chief executive's job, and I've seen that so many times in so many organizations, you're asking for trouble. So it's so important that the chair of the board, particularly in a charity, understands that their role is governance, their role is not running the organization. Getting that right to start with is so important. Some simple things also matter, like ensuring the board pack is not only delivered to directors on time, but is not 900 pages long. And I did work for one organisation that did once send out a 900-page board pack 2 or 3 days before the board meeting and wondered why no one read it. Other little tricks that you can play are things like putting timings on individual items on a board agenda. So not just putting a start time, but the length of time we expect to spend on each item. Then that way the things at the end of the agenda don't get missed off. But the other thing that I've used effectively is to sort of turn the agenda round sometimes. If you come into a board meeting, beginning of the day, everyone's probably feeling quite fresh. So deal with the important stuff at the beginning of the day and then deal with the standing items that are normally covered at the beginning of the agenda towards the end of the agenda. I don't know if you found that, Helena.
It's, you know, agreeing minutes. It's something we've got to do, but we've changed it so we do that at the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
And we've already asked people to submit their comments. It's interesting because I've not seen this just in charity. My background is private sector and transportation and power distribution. And some of the best meetings I've attended have been when the leader of the organisation has recognised where he's best placed, and in some cases has appointed a separate chair to enable him to make sure that he has the opportunity to speak, but the chair is controlled by somebody else, not by the power because of his position as president of the country or anything, but because he wants to get the best from that team. So I've seen different ways of making it work, and that role has been fundamental in effective meetings.
Brilliant. So just moving on to sort of discussion topics. Now, I captured these as part of the preparation call that we had yesterday. These are other topics that we touched on as we were discussing how we're going to run the session today, and which I haven't got slides for. There's a few items here I really want to call out because you were very vocal on this yesterday, Helena. Risk appetite, tolerance and culture. You're saying that you spend quite a bit of time talking about this. Do you sort of share where you where this is?
I think, again, it goes back to moving away from having an annual review of your risk register and actually linking your risks to the strategy and the overall performance of the organisation. Then it's on the agenda all the time. But then that drives a culture of understanding risks. And that culture shift has been fundamental for us in being able to have those conversations and be able to identify not just the typical risks. You know, we can all talk about the pandemic and the impact of that, but we've got much in-depth risks now as a result of that as we come out of this situation. And I need a board that is thinking about those with a different appetite in a way. But it's also led me to recognise who in my room, when I'm talking about decision making, how we need to communicate to make sure that people understand and have enough information to respond to their risk appetite. So if I know somebody's risk averse, I'll know how to present that. If I know somebody who's probably a little bit more gung-ho, but I wish they'd challenge me a little bit more than they have done, I know how to position that as well. I feel I do the best job when I've got critical friends on my board that are challenging me. I worry if I go away and have not been challenged. And some of this is typically I have my finance and treasurer risk appetite very narrow. I've got some other people, you know, let's do this. It's fine. It'll all be fine. And I don't like making judgments on it'll all be fine. So risk appetite, I've had to spend some time getting to know my board. I've had to spend time with them. And now that helps me position things.
So what are we going to do if it all goes wrong? We can't talk about governance without talking about whistleblowing. And I know yesterday, again, Helena, you've got a really, I think it's quite an innovative and different approach to whistleblowing for a charity. In the UK, we've got organisations that individuals can whistleblow to. But for anybody on the call that doesn't understand whistleblowing, do you want to just explain briefly what it is?
Yeah, whistleblowing is enabling people across the organisation at every level to be able to raise issues and without facing any form of discrimination or victimisation as a result of raising those issues. And of course, if you're raising issues about your boss or your boss's boss or the owner of the business, very hard to do, to be courageous enough to do that. So most organisations in the UK will have a whistleblowing policy, and we've learned from other people's mistakes. It's great when other people make mistakes because you look at it and you review it and you learn. And that for me is where we've put some new things in place. I've learned that people will always worry, even if I give them the opportunity to and the means to, they worry about raising an issue. So I've put in place a whistleblowing, an independent whistleblowing helpline. And any employee can go to that independent whistleblowing line to get advice and guidance, because it's also some specific things that state what's whistleblowing and what is just a grievance. So they're really good at directing employees in the right way. But also I've got independence, because if that is about me, or it's about one of my board members, or it's about one of my team or direct reports, I know I've got an independent perspective on that. And our employees feel more able to raise that externally than they do internally.
Which is critical, isn't it? Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And Steve, I know you've got some views on this as well, and some examples of when perhaps it's gone wrong for organisations and whistleblowing hasn't been effective.
Well, some of the things that I've seen go wrong in organisations are, I'll give 2 examples. One is where a board might want to focus too much on governance and process to the exclusion of purpose and long-term direction. And the other one is where the opposite happens. So if take those 2 together, what I mean by that is a board has a number of different roles. Yes, it's responsible for governance across the organisation, but it's also responsible for determining the purpose of the organisation and ostensibly responsible for long-term strategic direction. My own view on this is that boards should develop long-term strategic direction with executive management. It should be done hand in glove together. The board are accountable, and executive leadership are responsible for leading the delivery, but it should be a partnership between the 2. Where it goes wrong, and it does go wrong in some charities sometimes, where the board says, look, we don't actually know anything about what this organisation does, so we'll leave the strategy to the executive team. That's just not right, doing it that way. The alternative, and this happens more often, is where the board turn around and say, right, okay, well, we work in the area this organisation works in, so we'll develop the strategy and then we'll give it to Helena to implement. Well, that never works either, does it? Because you need direct input from the team running the organisation for any strategy to be effective. So it's be clear what the board's there for. And
so that would be in terms of reference then, wouldn't it, Steve?
Well, I was going to say, the 2 things that one should always have as a board are a terms of reference, including some form of job description for the chair of the board and for each director. So as a trustee and governor of the University of West of London, I have a job description. Don't get paid anything apart from a few expenses occasionally in the odd dinner, but I have a job description and I have a review against that job description by the chair, and that's right and proper. The other thing that quite often doesn't happen in organisations is a schedule of delegation that says, right, this is what the board's responsible for. This is what board committees are responsible for. And this is what executive leadership is responsible for. So you can imagine a matrix, and in that matrix, it will say who's responsible for leading each aspect and who contributes to each aspect and who stays out of that area.
Absolutely.
If you write those things down, it becomes so much clearer, particularly in those organisations. And again, I know this tends to happen in charities. It can happen in listed organisations as well, but where one has both a board and a council. So I sat on the board of an organisation that had a board led by a chairman and a council led by a president and a chief executive. So you've got 3 leaders. Now, when you've got 3 leaders for an organisation, I can tell you it slows everything down and it leads to confusion and overlap and mistakes. I'd never personally take any organisation down that route, but one can see why some organisations end up with that sort of 2-tier governance system. But my warning is be careful about that if you're going to do that.
We have exactly that sort of delegation of authority, and we do review that annually because things change. But if I'm signing contracts for £6 million, I want the board to be accountable for that. So the way we've structured it is to use the, the RACI, responsible, accountable, consulted and informed. So we'll, for any projects or key themes, we'll be identifying where that level of responsibility sits. It wasn't in place when I first joined, I have to say. I could have spent anything or done anything, which actually worried me because there was no clear route of accountability, and I think that's really important. So yeah, for me, that delegation of authority is quite critical.
So have we got any questions? We've been talking for sort of 45 minutes, 50 minutes. Have we got any questions that you want to?
Yeah, so there are a couple of questions. The first one is, whilst we have to be conductors, both as leaders and when managing risk, are there barriers caused by individual business functions creating silos and fiefdoms that mean they are playing their own tune whilst the rest of the orchestra are playing another? And I must say, people are loving the music analogy.
Okay, which one is good? Who's going to take that one? Dave?
The answer is yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you shouldn't have the basic answer. You shouldn't have fiefdoms. If you've got fiefdoms within the business, it's up to the chief executive to sort that out and stop it from happening. If there are fiefdoms happening within a board, then again, it comes back to the role of the chair. But there's no hiding place for this. If it's happening, it needs to stop because it will ruin the organisation.
Start playing out a tune, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the conductor for an orchestra can't pretend it's not their fault. If bits of the orchestra are playing out of tune, everyone's looking at the conductor, and the accountability is clear. The accountability should be clear in any organisation as well.
Hannah,
thank you. Another question is, you have all talked about what you have done and how you've gone about bringing this in. It's great to hear, but I was wondering what you would say was the biggest challenge in doing all of this in terms of governance.
Change programs. Change programs are never easy, are they? I know you've gone through a massive change program, haven't you, at Heart of England MenCap. Do you want to just describe some of the ways you've broken down some of those barriers, because it has been a journey?
I think it goes right back to what was on the centre of your diagram, which was, I will probably steal pride, is about the purpose. We bring everything back to that. And that means that we are all on the same page. And believe you me, we've come from where we've been in completely different books and different orchestras, or however, whatever the analogy. What's been most effective also then is looking at that, but engaging with people and bringing them along on the journey that we've been. And some people haven't liked that journey, I'll be honest. Some people have looked at the map about where we're going and go, but I don't want to go there. And those are conversations you have to be strong enough to have that discussion and say, well, that means that we're not aligned. If you don't want to go there, you want to go somewhere different, that isn't going to work. And before that breaks down, it doesn't always happen. Sometimes people just carry on going in their own silo, on their own way. My job as chief exec is to manage that, is to spot it and manage it. But if you bring it back to the purpose and then the surrounding strategies, it does start to give you real focus.
Couldn't agree more, and that's part of a change program, isn't it? You've got to be really, really clear on where the organisational direction, where the organisation's going, and it's okay to not be okay with it. Not everybody wants to be part of that journey, and sometimes it's just about helping people to understand either where their place is within the new organisation, whether their place isn't within the new organisation. And you're right, that's, as leaders, that can just be tough conversations.
Yeah.
Someone once said to me that when it comes to change programs, the typical change program starts with blind enthusiasm, and it then followed by dawning realization, which is then followed by sheer hard work, which is then followed by failure, and then promotion of the non-participants, and punishment and sacking of the innocent. Now, that might be a somewhat cynical view, but recognizing that can happen is half the battle. So in talking to organisations about strategy these days, I always talk to them not about trying to predict the future, because the truth is that if you try and predict the future, you're probably right half the time and wrong the other half of the time. We can't predict the future. We can think about the future, we can try and learn from the past, but the most important aspect of strategy is developing a strategy that enables us to adapt to change and variability. Because I think the last couple of years and COVID have shown us that change and variability can be a very, very big thing in this world. And I can tell you that whatever we're going to be talking about in 2023, it's probably not going to be COVID. It's probably not going to be, well, it will be sustainability, but it will be something else really important that nobody's thought of yet. So having that strategy led by the board that enables the organisation to adapt to change is so important.
Absolutely. Sue, I think we've got time for one more question before we reach the top of the hour, and I say thank you to Steve and Helena.
Yeah, we do. How can I assess if my board is effective?
Right, Steve, I know we've got some collateral on this, haven't we? Board effectiveness.
Well, we didn't really want to give an advert for some of the work that Helen and I do, but we all do work in the area of board effectiveness. But I'd follow a simple sort of 4-step process. We could give you a questionnaire that you go through. The first step of the process is questionnaire to every director that asks a whole series of questions, probably getting on for 100 different questions, get them to fill it in, score 1 to 5 against each. And these are things like, is the chair an effective leader of board meetings? Get everyone to fill that in. The second part, structured interviews, ideally with every director, but certainly with the chair of the board and with the company secretary. The third part would consist of attendance and observation, both board meetings, but also board committee meetings. Most boards have subcommittees, like a remuneration committee, for instance, or a risk committee, that are committees of the board. So, and the fourth element is a documentation review. Just look at those 900-page board packs and ask yourself the question, are they effective? Do they ask the right questions using the right language? I mean, do they use 3-letter acronyms like EDI? I mean, I used to work in IT, so I know that EDI stands for Electronic Data Interchange, but I now chair the Workforce Committee for a university, so I've been put right that EDI doesn't stand for that. It now stands for Ethnicity and Diversity Index. So we all fall into these traps that where we use jargon, half of your recipients will understand the jargon and the other half will misunderstand the jargon. So never ever use it.
Thanks, Steve.
And we've got a slide we've got a slide up there that says ISO as well. That's jargon.
Yeah.
But
that's a topic for a different day. We are at the top of the hour. I am just going to say a huge thank you to Steve and to Helena for joining us for this brilliant session. Hopefully, if you've got anybody questions that haven't been answered, then please, Sue, I think we can capture them and we can feed back in an email or something. This is going to be recorded. It's going to be available on the YouTube channel tomorrow, I think you said, Sue, didn't it? But I'll hand back to you to close.
Yes, thank you ever so much, Helen. Yeah, just on behalf of everybody here today, so thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Really interesting discussions. And yes, the recording will be on YouTube either later today or tomorrow morning, and so anybody will be able to catch up and recap on anything in their own time. So thank you all once again. Thank you for those people that have joined us this afternoon as well. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll sign off now. So thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.